On today's show, De'Aaron Fox is peaking, but is it too little too late? We'll take a sneak peek into a major offseason coming up for the Sacramento Kings and another Royal Rebounds Fan of the Week. That's all coming up on the Royal Report.
Good morning. Welcome back to Royal Rebounds, the Sacramento Kings YouTube channel for fans by fans. Happy Friday, everyone. This is episode 19 of the Royal Report, a Sacramento Kings sports talk show where we wrap up an entire week of Kings action in about 30 minutes. If you are a Kings fan, make sure you smash up that like button down below and consider hitting that subscribe button.
Thanks again for being here, everyone. It is another fantastic Friday, and Barry and I are going to get the show started the same way we always do, with some highlights from around the league. Morant has been jaw-dropping this season, must-see TV in the NBA. The Memphis Grizzlies are one of the surprise teams of the season. They are just one game or a half game back of the second overall seed in the Western Conference, and Ja has had a large part to do with that. He is rewriting the history books as we speak for the Memphis franchise. Last Saturday in Chicago, Morant set a franchise record with 46 points in a win over the Bulls. Not to be outdone, 2 days later, he comes back with a new franchise record, 52 points against the San Antonio Spurs. Barry, the highlights from that game were unreal. He had the poster dunk on Jakob Poeltl, not to mention Steven Adams' full court pass at the end of the half where Ja Morant catches the ball in the air to sink the shot at the buzzer. He has been nothing short of amazing this season. There's even a cool story about one of his childhood friends being at the game against San Antonio, saying before the season started he wanted to have Ja's game-worn jersey from his first 50-point game. He was in the building for that 50-point game and took the jersey right off his back. The guy is likable as he is talented at basketball.
Yeah, he's truly playing out of his mind, and the team is playing well also. Early on this season, we saw Ja Morant miss a big chunk of games, and that did not slow down the Memphis Grizzlies. He comes back, and this team is definitely a force to be reckoned with in the Western Conference. Speaking of teams that are getting better or moving higher up in the standings, the Philadelphia 76ers are now 3-0 with the new look James Harden and Joel Embiid tandem. James Harden is setting records in only his second game with the Sixers. He becomes the first player in franchise history to record a 25-point, 10-rebound, 15 assists, and 5-steal game. And he is just playing out of his mind. James Harden is currently only 5 threes away from tying Reggie Miller for all-time threes list. He's looking like a different player in Philadelphia, Calvin.
Yeah, he certainly seems happier to play. James Harden's former team, the Brooklyn Nets, may have the most talented roster from top to bottom, but it doesn't do much for you if none of those guys are available to play. They did get one major piece back on Thursday. Kevin Durant made his return, playing his first game since January 15th with a sprained MCL. The Nets took a ridiculous tumble during the 21 games that Durant missed. They went 5-16 over that stretch, dropping from second in the East to 8th in the East. But man, are they glad to have him back. Durant came back and scored 31 points for the Nets in a loss on Thursday night. He took the go-ahead three in the final seconds and unfortunately missed. But of course, that's the guy you want with the ball in your hands. He seemed to have not missed a beat at all, scoring, as I mentioned, 31 after missing nearly a month and a half, Barry. Are the Nets going to be okay now that they have Durant back?
I think that's still yet to be seen here. However, they do need to take advantage of the rest of the games they have this season, with good news coming from, Kyrie Irving's camp and a potential for him to play home games if there's some laws changing here, Kevin Durant coming back healthy. And then the question mark surrounding Ben Simmons, whether he will be available for this team, when he will play, and what kind of impact he will have. This team definitely has a lot of talent on it. It's just whether they can put all these pieces in the right spots and get ready and gear up for a playoff run. Speaking of playoffs, the Phoenix Suns have secured home court advantage, and they are the first team to win 50 games. We saw this team in the finals last year, unfortunately for them, losing to the Milwaukee Bucks. Calvin, this is a good team. They're getting better. They're getting older, and they're definitely getting a lot more experienced. How are you feeling on Phoenix's chance at the title this season?
I feel great about their chances. I think that Phoenix has been the most consistent team all season long, even more consistent than the Golden State Warriors. They're really clicking on all cylinders right now. You mentioned they're getting a little bit older, but their core is still very, very young. This team's going to be good for a long, long time.
Speaking of teams that are good for a long time or not good for a long time, the Kings had another week of basketball action. They go 2-2 this week, Calvin, which is 500, which is all us Kings fans can really ask for at this point. I know we were rooting for a few more wins to try and get into that playoff spot. But hey, they won 2 games this week, so we got to take the wins wherever we can get them. Unfortunately, they lost to the Nuggets and the Pelicans. Jokic had a triple-double in that first game. And, the Pelicans game, I think, was one of the biggest games for the season for them. Unfortunately, they end up losing that game. But as I mentioned, they won 2 games this week. They were able to defeat the Thunder, and they were able to defeat the Spurs. We saw De'Aaron Fox, Harrison Barnes, both having great games this week. Are the Kings making the playoffs? We're really not sure here, Cal.
This week was a very stereotypical week of Kings basketball. They came into the week, everybody had documented how big a week of games this was for their playoff or play-in chances. They give you just a little bit of hope early on. They play really, really well offensively. De'Aaron Fox, Harrison Barnes, Sabonis, they all have great individual performances, for spurts here of these 4 games. I don't know how many people expected them to beat Denver, but they come back with a great offensive game, one of their better offensive games of the season against Oklahoma City in a must-win situation. And then you mentioned the biggest game of the year against New Orleans. Looking good for a half, down 4 at halftime, only scoring 34 points in the second half and losing by 30. That is so typical of a Kings team, right, Barry? And then they come back the next game and beat San Antonio to just keep us hanging on a little bit longer.
Yeah, they keep playing with my emotions, Calvin. I don't like it at all.
No, it has not been fun to be a Kings fan this season. We've had some good moments up and down. De'Aaron Fox has been one of those good moments as of late. He is playing as well, if not his best basketball of the entire season, getting off to a slow start. Most people really expecting more from him after a near all-star performance last year. Well, he's definitely putting up those types of numbers lately, particularly since the trade for Sabonis. He's also been distributing the ball very, very well. A guy that really we have looked to be the leader and take the reins of this team and lead them into the postseason. He's playing like that player now, but the team hasn't quite had the same type of results, Barry, that we would have hoped for at this point in the season. Is it too little too late here for De'Aaron to be putting together these types of performances?
It's definitely possible. However, you do like to see your franchise player getting into a rhythm and, starting to perform better towards the end of the season. He's gaining chemistry with Sabonis. As you mentioned, he's been passing the ball a lot more. He's averaging 8 assists per game over the last 4 games. And in this last game, Calvin, 9 assists, 0 turnovers. That's huge. You and I have both been critical of De'Aaron Fox and some of the turnovers he's had this season. He's also been scoring the ball a lot better. He is averaging 26.7 points per game since his return from the ankle injury. And I know he did miss some games due to the ankle injury. It was kind of weird timing right around the trade deadline there. But De'Aaron Fox has not recorded less than 20 points in a game since mid-January. So it's been a little while here, Calvin.
Yeah, well, I think if you're a Kings fan or anybody within the organization, you absolutely needed to see De'Aaron finish the season this way. After trading fan favorite Tyrese Halliburton to the Indiana Pacers, a lot of Kings fans were questioning whether or not De'Aaron Fox was the guy for this team or if it was time to move on from him. Well, he's definitely reassuring a lot of those people right now with his play that the team obviously needs to pick it up and have a good offseason and make a transition into being a winning team next year. But if they're not going to go anywhere without De'Aaron Fox playing at an all-star level, and that's what he's doing right now.
Yeah, he started out the season very slow. Now he's averaging 22 points per game and 5 assists per game. It's a much improved stat line for him since October, November, December. But what everyone wants to know about Calvin is the play-in. So we're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the play-in. Welcome back. Well, the question, I guess it's not a new question because we've been wondering this for the past couple years since the play-in has even been a real thing. But will the Kings make the play-in? Currently, right now, 9th and 10th seed in the West qualify for the play-in tournament. They play 7 and 8. If you are in the 9th or 10th seed, you have to win 2 games to qualify for the playoffs. If you're in 7 and 8, you only have to win 1 game. Currently, we have quite a few teams fighting for these last 2 positions. We have the Lakers, the Pelicans, the Blazers, the Spurs, and your Sacramento Kings. The victory last night over the Spurs definitely helps this team. However, they did lose to the Pelicans. They have 1 more game against the Pelicans to finish out the year, so that will be a very, very important game. Who knows what's happening with the Lakers here, and Portland seems to be sellers at the trade deadline. So it will definitely be quite a race to the end of the season. It's just, are the Kings going to be involved, Calvin? I don't know. We have a tough week of basketball coming up here, and the schedule doesn't get any easier to finish out the season other than a couple games against Houston. Calvin, I want to know from you, are the Kings making the play-in?
Well, there is a chance, but there's not a very big chance. If you actually look at the numbers, the Kings have a 0.3% chance currently of making the postseason. So there is just a slight chance. Out of all those teams that you just mentioned, there's 5 teams jockeying for 2 spots. Sacramento really has odds stacked against them, not just the playoff odds. They have the worst record of those 5 teams. They're 3.5 games back currently of just the 10th seed. And then you look at as you mentioned, the remaining schedule. The Lakers have the 2nd toughest schedule remaining in the NBA. The Kings have the 5th toughest schedule remaining in the NBA. And then those other 3 teams, New Orleans has the 16th hardest remaining, San Antonio 21st, and the Trailblazers have the easiest remaining schedule in the NBA. So it is not looking good if you're the Sacramento Kings. But you're saying there's a chance? I guess that's all we've had to really hang on here as Kings fans for the past few seasons.
Yeah, we're talking about playoffs.
If I had to make a prediction, it's not looking good right now, I would say.
Welcome to Kings basketball.
And on that note, we should look ahead to this offseason. Whether or not the Kings make the play-in tournament or the postseason, this upcoming offseason is an incredibly important one for this franchise and for Monte McNair in his tenure as GM of the Sacramento Kings. He finally made a big splash at the trade deadline, acquiring a 2-time All-Star in Domantas Sabonis, but there is more work to be done. This team has been desperately looking for a full-time starting power forward all season long, and the shooting guard position has been in question as well, especially now that Tyrese and De'Aaron Fox are not the starting backcourt for the Sacramento Kings. So, Barry, let's look ahead to the draft this season, break down the percentage chance or the percentages here for draft picks for the Sacramento Kings, and are there some players that you're going to be targeting specifically here for the Kings in this draft?
Well, a lot of Kings fans want the Kings to have a top 5 pick or potentially a top 3 pick in this NBA draft coming up, but it's going to be very difficult. Let's jump here into the numbers. The Kings currently have the 6th worst record in the league, and their odds on favorite to get the 7th pick with a 29.7% chance at the 7th pick and a 20.6% chance at the 8th pick currently. These numbers will change. Just keep that in mind. The Kings still have 17 games left on the season. Depending on where they finish, these numbers will change, but these are just current projections. They currently have a 9% chance at the number 1 pick, 9.2 for the number 2 pick, and a 9.4% chance at pick number 3. And rounding it out, 9.6 at pick number 4. So the odds are right now that the Sacramento Kings are going to land in the 7th to 8th range like normal, but they do have a chance to get the first pick. They do have a chance to get the second pick. They have a chance to get a top 5 pick in this draft. That is true. This all depends on whether they make the play-in, as we just talked about earlier. May 17th is the NBA Draft Lottery. That is a very important date for us Kings fans. You all need to circle it on your calendar. Send whatever good juju or whatever you can to this team. We need to win the Draft Lottery if we don't end up making the play-in tournament. Another thing to mention here is the Kings have a 0.2% chance at the 10th pick currently, and as standings currently stand, the Kings cannot pick lower than 10th if they finish the season as they are right now, Calvin.
Yeah, just like the postseason, you're saying there's a chance of a top draft pick. I think the Kings are, Monty McNair, I would expect to look to deal this year's draft pick. No matter where they end up falling, I think that Sacramento is in the mindset of we are now one player away from being a playoff caliber team, and they're going to try to go out and get a proven player, as there isn't really one franchise-changing type player available in this draft. I think there's a few players coming out here that the Kings are really going to like in this draft. Guys like Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren, Paolo Banchero, Jaden Ivey. There's definitely some very talented players, but none of those guys are going to take you from one of the worst teams in the Western Conference to a playoff team right away. So I think you're going to look for guys that we've been hearing ever since the trade deadline. Names like John Collins, names like Bradley Beal, those types of players that you know would move the needle a lot in the right direction right away if the Kings were able to acquire one of those guys. That's going to be the main focus for Sacramento this offseason. Whether or not they're able to pull off a deal for one of those guys still remains to be seen, though. But I think Monty McNair gave us all a little bit of evidence that there is definitely a possibility for him to do some magic here and make a deal that is going to be very, very meaningful and impactful for the Kings moving forward.
Yeah, June 23rd is the draft day this season. Very, very important day. It could be as important as the lottery or maybe even more important, depending on where they land. The Kings cannot afford to screw up another draft. But as you mentioned, I think they're going to end up trading this pick as well. On that topic, let's move on here to off-season targets. I think the number one priority for this Kings team, besides coaching, as far as filling out the roster, is definitely finding a starting quality shooting guard or deciding if they already have one on this roster. And then also filling that 4 position that the Kings have really, really been lacking. There are a few big name trade targets that I have on my list here. These are the top fish in the free agency market, and it's very unlikely the Kings are able to even acquire any of these, but hey, you got to make the call. You got to do your due diligence. I would love to be able to acquire one of these guys, and that is Bradley Beal, Jaylen Brown, Pascal Siakam, John Collins, and I'm going to throw Lou Dort in here as well. I'm not really sure exactly what the Thunder are doing at this point. They're stacking picks. They're stacking talent. It doesn't seem like Lou Dort is part of the future for them. I'm not really sure, but I would love to have him on this Kings roster. And then moving on here, we have a couple top name free agents that I would love if the Kings were able to sign. However, like I said, I don't know how achievable these guys really are. Zach LaVine's a free agent, Gary Harris. I really love Robert Covington, Serge Ibaka, Montrezl Harrell. I think the last couple names I mentioned there are definitely more gettable than guys like Zach LaVine. But it's very important that the Kings figure out exactly who is going to be in the starting 5 next season. And then, Calvin, I have a couple other guys here listed in Deandre Ayton and Jared Culver. I know both of them were not offered contract extensions or their option was expired. Would you be interested in adding any one of these guys? We've seen Sabonis play well with another big in Indiana around Miles Turner. I think if the Kings could get a guy like Deandre Ayton, I think him and Sabonis together could be huge for this Kings team.
Yeah, I agree with that, definitely. I mean, you know how big of a fan of DeAndre Ayton I've been ever since he was at Arizona. I loved him as the number one pick coming out of college. I would love for him to be a member of this Sacramento Kings team. While I find it a little bit unlikely, like those other big names that you were mentioning, if there's a possibility that the Kings could end up signing him, I think that would be a home run for Sacramento. Any of those guys, really. I mean, you know, you look at those trade options. I hope that the Kings are in deep with all of those guys. Bradley Beal, he's got a player option. He's already said, as he has said before, that he intends to re-sign with the Wizards for God knows what reason. But he is loyal to the soil there in Washington, just like Damian Lillard is out in Portland. But those other guys, Siakam, you know, any of those big name shooting guards or power forwards, I think you have to pick up the phone and ask what it's going to take to get those guys. Donovan Mitchell is another name to keep in mind here, as it's becoming more and more apparent that he is not happy with the situation in Utah and wants out. It would be a downgrade, I think, for him to come to a team like Sacramento, at least at first. But the fact that those guys might be available is all that you need if you're Monty McNair to pick up the phone and try to figure out what it's going to take to get them. But Barry, as you say here on this show, it takes two to tango. So I'm going to focus here on the free agent targets because those are more controllable. At least, you know, you have the offer and they accept or decline rather than having to go through the trade route. A lot of those players that you mentioned, I think, would be serviceable players here for the Kings. There's no like major free agent class available this season, but players that I like, Gary Harris would be a really good two-way player to add on this team. TJ Warren, I think, is another name to keep in mind. Guy's only played 4 games this season for Indiana, coming off a major season and injury. A couple of years ago, he had that huge showing out in the bubble. You might be able to get him for a cheaper deal because he hasn't really played at all this season. Some other names, Ibaka, like you mentioned. Chris Boucher in Toronto is a good stretch for. It's another one of those players that I don't think solves necessarily the long-term answer at power forward, but he provides a skill set that I think would be useful for the Kings. Avery Bradley, everybody's favorite two-way shooting guard. If you're not able to sign one of these bigger name free agents or make a big trade splash, getting a guy like Avery Bradley will still help the roster. Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis are both free agents out in Milwaukee, championship experience. And Bobby Portis, I think, has had one of the more underrated seasons of any center in the league this year. He's a stretch big man that can shoot from the outside, so I think you could play him alongside Sabonis as well.
Yeah, the Kings have upwards of $20 million in cap space this season. There's not a lot of teams in the NBA that have that much space. So they're definitely going to be a player in the free agent market. As far as trades go, as you mentioned, these guys are not quite the most achievable guys, but it all comes down to me to that draft lottery. If the Kings are able to snag the first, second, or third pick, that definitely gives them an advantage in acquiring a guy on the trade market. We're going to take another break here, and when we come back, we're going to dive into Calvin's favorite part of the show, Cowbell Questions.
Welcome back. We're ringing the bell here on the Royal Report. It is time for Cowbell Questions, where you have questions, Barry and I have answers.
Hopefully.
For all of your Sacramento Kings needs. Vinny, let's take our first question this week.
Who is the most underrated player on this Kings roster?
Wow, that's a tough question. I'm going to go outside the box here, and I'm going to say Harrison Barnes. I don't think that he gets the credit that he deserves. This dude has, averaged over 20 points per game in an NBA season. He's been playing really well for the Kings as of lately. I know he hasn't been there through the entire season after his hot start, but I don't think HB gets enough love for everything that he does. So I'm going to go with HB, most underrated King on the roster.
Yeah, this is a hard question to answer for me because in order to be underrated, you have to outperform what most people expect of you. And aside from 3 players that I can think of on this Kings roster, Harrison Barnes, De'Aaron Fox, and Domantas Sabonis, I'm not sure that anyone falls into that category of outplaying any expectations. And then you look at those three, De'Aaron Fox has underperformed what most people expected of him this year. Sabonis is already a two-time All-Star. So I'm going to have to agree with you here. I think Harrison Barnes is the most underrated player on this Kings team. I think that most people view Harrison as an incredibly solid all-around player. But if you don't watch him on a daily basis, I don't think many people realize exactly how many areas of the game this guy impacts on a nightly basis. He's a phenomenal rebounder, a very efficient shooter that has gotten better and better, both from the free throw line and the three-point line over his career. As you mentioned, he's scored nearly 20 points a game in his career already, not for Sacramento, but he's come close. And he's a fantastic, versatile defender, not one of the better defenders in the NBA, but a guy that can guard multiple positions. He really is a very undervalued player overall, I think, who has performed, very steadily for the Kings and for the Mavericks, over the course of his entire career. And from a guy who started off being, I think it was the 7th overall pick, very, very high expectations, goes to Golden State and kind of gets lost in the shuffle with all those Hall of Fame players there. He's really turned his career into a very, very admirable one in the NBA, I would say. So Harrison Barnes, definitely.
Yeah, definitely underrated in Golden State, helping that team break the NBA record for most wins in a season at 73. He was definitely underrated in Dallas as the Kings were able to acquire him for just Justin Jackson and old retiring Zach Randolph. He's definitely outplayed his contract here in Sacramento, and it's a front-loaded contract too, so it gets better and better every year for the Kings. I agree with you, Calvin. I got to say HB. Next question.
Best game this season?
Well, there haven't been a ton of those games, I would say, for Sacramento, but there are a few that stand out. And for me, I'm going to have to take the homer pick, the obvious one, that triple overtime win at what was then called Staples Center against the Lakers and Anthony Davis, LeBron. It was such an exciting game, first and foremost. Triple overtime. You beat your hated rivals. And not to mention the Kings haven't had many of those big-time wins this season. So give me that triple overtime thriller in L.A.
Yeah, that was an awesome game. I don't really know how many overtime games we've seen this season from Sacramento. They don't seem to go to overtime very often, but that one they did, and they were able to pull out a win. It was a truly incredible game. I'm a little split. I love that game. That is probably the best game of the season, but I'm going to go with my own personal pick here, and maybe I'm biased because we were able to go to this game, but I'm going to say it's that second game against Minnesota, the first game of Sabonis being on this Kings team. It was just an incredible win. The building was electric. It was really cool. After everyone was just crushed from trading Tyrese Halliburton, we saw what this guy Sabonis can do, and it really goes to show how much better this Kings team is with a guy like Sabonis on it. And it was just an overall amazing game to go to. Next question.
Most likely, Kings make the play-in or get a top 5 pick in the draft.
You're not going to like my answer, Calvin, because I'm going to say neither. I don't think the Kings are going to make the play-in, and unfortunately, I don't think they're going to get a top 5 pick in the draft either. We went over all those numbers. It's looking like odds-wise the Kings are going to finish with probably the 6th or 7th worst record in the NBA, and they're probably going to have the 7th or 8th pick again. Now, I'm not a complete negative Nancy here. That doesn't mean that they're not going to get a good player in the draft. As we saw, the Kings were able to pick up Davion Mitchell in last year's draft at pick number 9, and Tyrese Halliburton the year before at pick number 12, who we were able to flip for a 2-time All-Star in Sabonis. So I still think you can get a good player at 7 and 8. I'm just not very hopeful for the play-in or for a top 5 pick at this point.
Well, yeah, you're right. The odds for both of those things are not good, as we've already mentioned. I think it was a slightly less than 10% chance at one of the top 4 picks and a 0.3% chance at the postseason. But the question is, what is more likely? So if I'm going off of the percentages, a top 5 pick is more likely than a postseason berth. However, I agree with you. I think both of these things are overall not going to happen for Sacramento. They're probably going to fall somewhere in the 6 to 10 range for the draft. But if you're thinking that Monty McNair is going to trade this draft pick this summer anyway, then it's probably not going to matter too much, assuming that they are able to get a really, really good player in return for that pick. However, again, if we're going with what is more likely, a higher draft pick is more likely than a postseason berth right now. That is all the time that we have for Cowbell Questions. Thank you so much for your submissions. Barry and I really, really appreciate them. If you'd like to submit a question for us to answer on a future show, just write it in the comment screen below this video and hashtag it Cowbell Questions.
Well, we are back on our fan spotlight again. This week we have chosen a fan, Skip from Sacktown Breakdown. He is a regular on the show. He joins us in a bunch of live streams and also helps us out every once in a while. So we want to thank you, Skip, for all your support, of the Kings. I'm giving you a new nickname here, the real Phoenix Jones. And let's take a look at a Skip clip here about why he's a Kings fan.
What's up, y'all? This is your boy Skip, aka Skip-A-Tosh here of the Sacktown Breakdown. Shout out to my guys at Royal Rebounds, Cal and Barry, for honoring me with this. Why am I a Sacramento Kings fan? I live in this great city, Sacramento, that people don't know how dope it is. We have still the best fans in the NBA, in my personal opinion. We just need more of a reason to yell and rah, rah, rah about our team, and those days are ahead for sure. I'm looking forward to those days. I'm looking forward to the playoff games, but the years that we've already had and how dope they were with the OG squad, with Christie and Bibby and Vlade and Weber and all that stuff, man. How could we not be a fan of those times? Those are some of the funnest times in the NBA, period. And those will return to Sacktown. And because of y'all, this is the reason why I'm a fan.
Thank you again, Skip, or Sacktown Breakdown, or the real Phoenix Jones, whatever you want to be called these days. We really appreciate both you and your fandom of the Sacramento Kings. It keeps us going. So yeah, go Kings. We got to keep sticking together here through these dark, rough times, right?
Yes, we do. We're all part of the Royal family here on Royal Rebounds. And if you're not, make sure you hit that subscribe button to join the Royal family with Skip, Vinny, Calvin, and I.
Absolutely.
Speaking of which, Calvin, we do have another week of Kings basketball. The Kings have 3 games this week. They play the Mavericks, the Knicks, and the Nuggets. I don't know how hopeful I am for basketball this week, Calvin, but hey, it's more opportunities to watch Kings basketball, so I'm excited for that. Unfortunately, they are playing the Mavericks in the next game, and your best friend, Luka Doncic, who unfortunately the Kings passed on with the number 2 pick in the NBA draft just a few seasons ago. He is playing lights out, and the Mavericks are currently 38-25 on the season, but there's a reason they play the game, Calvin. There is a reason they play the game.
That's true. It is not going to be an easy one for Sacramento. Dallas has had a very surprising season defensively. They've been one of the top defensive teams in the NBA all year long. They're second in scoring defense at just over 103 points per game given up. They also defend the three-point line very well. And Sacramento, if they're not hitting from outside, usually they struggle to win games. Dallas allows the 3rd fewest three-point attempts per game in the NBA. They also allow the 4th lowest percentage from long range. So this is going to be a tough one, not to mention we always hate going up against Luka Doncic, who is somehow putting together another ridiculous season, averaging nearly a 30-point triple-double on the year. After that, you've got a game against the Knicks and the Nuggets, as you mentioned. Barry, there's no sugarcoating it. We already said this. The Kings have the 5th toughest remaining schedule, so none of these games here down the stretch are going to be easy for Sacramento to manufacture wins. But you've traded for a 2-time All-Star. You have your franchise player playing at his highest level that he's played at this season. It's now or never if the Kings are going to make any type of noise here for this play-in tournament and the postseason.
Yeah, surprisingly, I really like this Knicks game. The Knicks are on a 6-game losing streak at this point. They seem to be falling apart. We heard about Kemba Walker getting benched. Kind of confusing situation over there as we've seen him have a lot of success in the NBA over the past few seasons. But I think the Kings definitely have a chance in this game against New York. And then unfortunately, they do play the Nuggets again, where Jokic has completely torn this Kings team apart. Sacramento is 0-3 against the Nuggets this season, losing back-to-back games just a week or so ago. But hey, like I said, they play the games for a reason. If the Kings are able to pull out 2, potentially 3 wins this week, I'm feeling a lot better about the play-in. I really am.
Yeah, a 3-0 week would have us all jumping up and down for joy. That's absolutely sure.
Yes. Well, we're going to wrap up the show here. Thank you all for joining us on another episode of The Royal Report with Calvin and Barry. Make sure you guys smash up that like button. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to join the Royal family. We will see you all post-game on Saturday, and Skip will actually be a special guest. So we'll get to see him a little bit more and pick his brain on some Kings action and their potential to make the plan. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a wonderful Friday. And in the meantime, go Kings.